Not every conquest is loud. Some are carved in silence, so precise it slices through the air before words arrive. You didn't throw chairs. You didn't perform rage. You didn't plead for decency from people addicted to their own delusions. No, you crushed the situation with something far more brutal. Clarity. You showed them, without theatrics, what it looks like when someone walks into chaos, dissects it calmly, and leaves no piece standing. You didn't retaliate emotionally. You recalibrated the entire atmosphere, and the precision of it. That's what made it unforgettable. You shattered their illusion of control by remaining unmoved. The shift wasn't in volume, it was in vibration. The second you made the decision not to engage on their level, the entire dynamic rewrote itself. They were ready for your outrage. They had their roles prepared. Look how angry they are. So unprofessional. So reactive. But you didn't give them that performance. You gave them presence. A dangerous kind of presence. The kind that corners liars with truth so quiet it deafens. You didn't attack. You unraveled. Exposed every move they thought was hidden. Called their bluff without speaking a word. They realized too late that they were playing checkers against someone designing the board. You made them realize that power doesn't scream, it decides. And you decided, in that moment, to become untouchable. Not by shielding yourself with ego, but by stripping the interaction of its emotional leverage. That's what they couldn't handle. You didn't react like prey. You didn't beg like a pawn. You walked through their theater like it was background noise. And when the dust settled, mid-thought, they couldn't remember what they'd said, but they remembered the way you looked at them. The way your eyes told the story of someone who had already calculated the end before they opened their mouth. Now they fear disrespecting you, not because you punish, but because you expose. You carry that rare trait restraint, controlled strength, that unnerves the insecure. They don't fear your fists. They fear the way you can dismantle a room with one sentence, the way you could crush their credibility with a single truth, the way your presence alone makes them reconsider their games. It wasn't your retaliation that broke them. It was the absence of it. You turned their peatness into performance art and let them hang themselves with their own monologues. That's what superiority looks like. Your psychology frightened them more than force ever could. They expected a storm. You gave them strategy. They expected revenge. You gave them results. You are no longer someone they test, because now they know the cost of failure. You showed them what happens when someone masters themselves instead of trying to master others. And that's what shifted everything. They realized you are not triggered. You are trained. And when someone is trained, they don't flinch, they calculate. They don't bark, they corner. That's why your name now comes with caution. They whisper now. Measure their tone. They reroute conversations when you enter. Because your presence has memory. It reminds them of the day they played too confidently and lost the audience. You are no longer a person they tried to manipulate. You are a reference point for consequence. They've renamed you in their private dialogues. Not enemy, event. You are the event they can't forget. The one who didn't just stand up, but restructured the architecture of the room by existing without apology. They won't test you again. Not because they fear your reaction, but because they know now you don't warn twice. You operate on a frequency that can't be reached by noise. They tried to trigger you, and now they stutter around your peace. They thought they were setting you up to fall, but you used the collapse to create leverage. They can't tell if you're quiet because you're done or quiet because you're just beginning. That ambiguity, it's psychological warfare. It makes cowards pause. It makes manipulators adjust. You are no longer a person to be approached lightly. You are a boundary with breath. And disrespect now comes with psychological tax too high for the foolish to afford. And still, you smile. You nod. You move on. That's what destroys them. You're not carrying anger. You're not plotting revenge. You've ascended beyond their story arc. They remained where they were, loud, desperate, narrating conflict from a seat you no longer occupy. You rose with grace they weren't expecting, with a strategy they didn't study. You crushed the situation not because you had to, but because you could. And nothing stings like being dismantled by someone who didn't break a sweat. Now, your silence is respected. Your name, avoided. Your truth, undeniable. They still talk about it, not publicly. No, that would expose their loss. But in fragments, in cautionary tales told to their own circle. Don't try that with them. They don't play. And the irony, you never had to play. You were the game. You were the consequence they didn't see coming. You were the moment that taught them power doesn't announce itself. It arrives and reality adjusts. So now they carry your presence like a ghost in their decisions, afraid to disrespect what they couldn't destroy, terrified of waking the version of you they'll never survive. You don't need to shout or prove or perform, because your very existence interrupts the performance around you. When they raise their voices, hoping their echo will cast a shadow over your calm, all they do is reveal how fragile their foundation is. You stand unmoved like a fixed point in a collapsing room. They throw opinions, assumptions, and desperate laughter. Anything to get you to react, to validate their importance. But you don't move. You never did. Because power doesn't pantomime. Power doesn't chase the applause. Power just is. You've become something so rare that it unsettles unbothered, unshakable, uncompromising in your silence. Your presence exposes the noise for what it really is. Desperation wrapped in volume. They thought status came from volume, but you showed them it comes from weight. Weight of spirit. Weight of self-knowledge. Weight of knowing you don't need to be seen to be significant. While they scream to be heard, you whisper and shift the entire tone of the room. They don't understand how you command so much with so little, because they've only ever known relevance through attention. You threaten the world they built, one where shouting equals substance. You refuse to enter the arena of noise, because you already won the war of knowing who you are. You let your restraint speak, not from fear, not from passivity, but from mastery. You don't show all your cards because you no longer need to play their game. You know what they don't do. Silence has gravity, and yours pulls truth out of falsehood. It strips pretense from every gesture. You could say 100 things to cut through their facade, but you choose not to, because you know the deepest wounds aren't inflicted by blades. They're carved by contrast. You stand there, grounded, calm, while they combust under the weight of their own insecurity, and that is your weapon. Composure that doubles as a mirror. You've learned how to take power back without raising your voice. They beg for reaction, for any emotional leakage they can use against you. But you starve them of it. You've replaced reactivity with rain. You walk into rooms without needing to announce who you are. The room adjusts to you. Their eyes betray their fear. They scan your face, search for cracks, something human enough to exploit, but they find steel, they find calculation, they find peace, and that disturbs them more than rage ever could. You've become something they don't know how to navigate, someone who doesn't require validation to feel complete. They're not used to people like you. They're used to performance, to applause addicts, to the emotional puppets they can manipulate by pulling a few strings of guilt or flattery. But you cut those strings long ago. You've redefined what it means to be present. You don't show up to entertain or explain. You show up to exist. And that, in a world obsessed with image, is revolutionary. They try to provoke you into becoming what they can comprehend, something loud, something reactive, something predictable. But you give them nothing. And that nothingness, it swallows them whole. You don't rise to every challenge because not every challenge is worthy. That's what they hate most. That you are no longer so easily baited. That you can walk away without turning around. That your energy no longer bends for petty battles. You've moved past the point of defense. You defend nothing now, because your existence is the defense. Your integrity, your consistency, your stillness, those are your rebuttals. And they scream louder because your silence makes their chaos louder to themselves. You make them hear the emptiness behind their own noise. Even when you speak, you don't try to convince, you state, you observe. You let truth land where it may, and it always lands heavy. You've learned that real power doesn't argue. It just waits. Waits for time to reveal what you already knew. They underestimated how patient you've become. How surgical. You don't need to shout, because you've already outlasted their drama. Your lack of need to prove yourself means they never stood a chance. They were looking for a fight. You gave them a funeral, with no words, no rage, no spectacle. Just distance and results. They will try to recreate your aura, mimic your rhythm, rebrand themselves with borrowed fragments of your calm. But imitation always trembles in the presence of authenticity. You don't compete because you are the measure, and they can't copy the essence you bled for. Every ounce of your restraint is backed by battles you never broadcasted. You earned the right to be unbothered. You earned the privilege of selective energy. You paid in silence, in self-discipline, in decisions no one clapped for. And now, they clap without knowing why. They feel it, the shift, the imbalance, that they are no longer the center of the room. They still think dominance looks like volume. They still believe status is tied to who talks longest or loudest. They don't realize you detached from that hierarchy long ago. You no longer chase the spotlight. They orbit around the quiet gravity you've become. The real intimidation wasn't your presence. It was the lack of effort behind it. You weren't trying. You weren't campaigning for approval or angling for control. You were simply there, and that unsettled them. Because they knew, they felt, that someone who doesn't need to perform can't be manipulated. You were beyond reach in a world ruled by egos that depend on recognition. That made you untouchable. You've seen what they try to weaponize: silence, dismissal, dismissance. They think these are tactics that will dismantle someone like you. But what they didn't understand is that those are the very things you were forgetting. You became who you are because no one clapped when you deserved it. Because you were abandoned in rooms you carried. Because you were ignored when your value was loud enough to drown theirs. And instead of collapsing, you adapted. You learned that needing nothing from them gave you everything they feared: autonomy, presence, unapologetic clarity. So now when they go quiet, you let them. When they withdraw, you don't chase. Because your self-respect has become their loudest critic. They wait for a signal from you. A crack, a falter, some emotion they can twist into arrogance, or coldness, or fragility. But you give them none. You walk in and remain composed while their insecurities fumble in every direction. You don't correct their misconceptions anymore because you know how much power lies in being misunderstood on purpose. You let them label you however they want, because each label they throw is another confession about how little they understand presence without performance. You didn't need to prove your depth to shallow thinkers. You simply let their noise collapse under your stillness. You don't perform because you've become a force that moves without needing to be seen. You've grown into someone whose path is paved in intentionality, not reaction. You're not there to convince anyone of your worth. That phase expired when you saw how easily people disregard what doesn't scream. Now, your silence becomes the ceremony. The atmosphere shifts before you speak. Your gaze rewrites tone. And when you do finally speak, it's not to fill a void. It's to end a delusion. You've stopped playing by rules they designed for people they could mold. You've become someone who can't be molded, only observed, at a distance. With caution, they start sentences carefully now. Watch their words like stepping through glass. Because you've made them realize the difference between someone who reacts and someone who remembers. You don't need to rage. You don't need to expose. You don't even need to respond. Because every calculated silence you choose becomes a lesson they feel in the gut. You've turned what used to be your wound, being ignored, into a sword. They now fear being ignored by you. That shift didn't come from power given. It came from power claimed, quietly, relentlessly, on your own terms. And even now, they try to decipher you. Watch your body language. Analyze your timing. Study how you move through rooms without seeking permission. You become the study guide they never had access to. The one that shows how composure dismantles chaos. You don't entertain weakness anymore. You let people disqualify themselves with their own performance. You watch them burn through all their strategies, and when they realize none work on you, that's when the fear sets in. That's when they finally understand that control isn't loud. That control doesn't beg. That control walks away without a bruise and leaves the room bleeding. So no, you don't need to shout. You don't need to prove. You don't need to perform your past that. You exist now as reminder, as echo, as consequence. You've become a quiet reckoning in a loud world. And every time they try to pull you back into the noise, they find themselves talking to shadows. Because you were the moment, and they missed it.